The antiseptic smell was a dull knife scraping the inside of my nose. I was dying. I could feel life slipping through my fingers, one drop at a time, while I stared up at the ceiling. It was white, the same bone white as the dress Catherine wore the day she died. 3 years ago, a so-called accidental car crash. And me? The joke of the Shaw family, the kept man who'd married into money, the loser who lived off his brilliant CEO wife. All I could do was watch her face flash across the cable news cheering. I remember that morning perfectly. We'd had another fight. I'd knocked over her favorite vase. She was standing in the foyer, makeup perfect, ready for work. She'd given me a look that could freeze fire, her voice stripped of all warmth. "Luke, is causing trouble the only thing you're good for?" The words skinned me alive. I bristled like a cornered animal, spitting back the first cruel thing that came to mind. "Yeah, that's me. The screw-up. Are you happy now?" She didn't say anything else, but I saw something shatter behind her cool gray eyes. Then she turned and walked out the door. It was the last time I ever saw her. Afterward, David Sterling, the smooth, polished guy who was always by her side, the one I'd always been jealous of, took over everything. Her company, her corner office. He even hinted, more than once, that if it hadn't been for me, Catherine would have been his. He backed me into a corner, stripped away every asset of the Shaw family fortune, and had me thrown out of the house like a dog. He visited me in the hospital just before the end. He leaned in close, his voice a triumphant whisper only I could hear. "You know, Luke, the brakes on that car? I was the one who cut the line. I meant for it to be you, but then she decided to switch cars at the last minute. It all worked out, though. With her out of the picture, things went so much more smoothly." So that was it. That was the truth. Rage and regret erupted in my chest like lava, but I didn't have the strength to lift a single finger. As the world faded to black, my only thought was, if I could just go back, if I could just have that morning again, I wouldn't fight with her. I'd tell her I love her. I would stop her from leaving. "Luke," a woman's voice, sharp and cold as an icicle, stabbed into my ears. I shot upright, gasping, my body electric with shock. I wasn't in a hospital. There was no white ceiling. I was on the sofa in our apartment, the one that had always felt more like a museum than a home. The lights were bright, and the air carried her signature scent, an aloof mix of expensive perfume and quiet distance. Catherine Shaw was standing right in front of me. She wore a tailored power suit, a leather briefcase in one hand, her brow furrowed in irritation. And on the floor between us lay a pile of shattered porcelain, her favorite vase. I looked down at my hands. They were whole, strong. I touched my face, no gaunt, papery skin of a dying man. The digital clock on the wall displayed the date, September 15th, 2021, the day before the crash. I was back. A tidal wave of joy and terror crashed over me. I stared at that face, so familiar and yet so foreign after 3 years, at those cool gray eyes, and a lump formed in my throat. I almost burst into tears. She was alive. She was right here. Are you just going to stare into space? You want to start another fight? Catherine's voice grew sharper when I didn't speak. "Luke, is causing trouble the only thing you're good for?" The old me, the me from my last life, would have felt his worthless pride ignite and would have lashed out. But hearing it now, it wasn't just an insult. Underneath the ice, I heard a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She wasn't just angry at me. She was profoundly, utterly disappointed in me. I got up from the sofa. I didn't look away like I usually did. I met her gaze and held it. She shifted, a flicker of unease in her eyes. I took a step toward her. "What are you doing?" she asked, taking a wary step back. I didn't answer. I just knelt and began picking up the broken pieces. I moved slowly, carefully, as if I were handling priceless artifacts instead of trash. Catherine froze. In all our years of fighting, I'd either given her the silent treatment or stormed out. I'd never once cleaned up a mess I'd made. I placed the last shard in the wastebasket and stood up, walking over until I was standing directly in front of her. She was tall, and in her heels we were almost eye to eye. I was close enough to smell the clean, crisp scent of her hair. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice was rough, trembling with the aftershock of coming back from the dead. Her body went rigid. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together as she tried to figure out what new game I was playing. I looked straight in her eyes and said, slowly and with absolute sincerity. And one more thing. Tomorrow, don't drive to the South Side Project. The confusion in her eyes deepened. What are you talking about? Take my car. I'll drive you, I said. With that, the flicker of surprise on her face vanished, replaced by pure, undisguised scorn. A cold smile touched her lips, as if I just told the funniest joke in the world. Your car? Luke, are you serious? That beat-to-hell Civic that's one pothole away from a junkyard. She paused, her gaze raking over me like a blade. Stop messing around. I don't have time for these stupid games. She turned her back on me and started toward her bedroom. I knew she didn't believe me. In the entire world, she was the person who believed in me the least. But this time, I wasn't letting her go. The instant she turned, I reached out and grabbed her wrist. It was cool and delicate, like polished marble. A tremor went through her. She spun back around, her eyes wide with shock and a hint of panic. In 3 years of marriage, other than our disastrous wedding night, I had never touched her so boldly. An Arctic river flowed between us. Luke, let go of me, she hissed, her voice a mix of anger and embarrassment. I didn't. I held on with all my strength, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again, watching her vanish from my life like smoke. Catherine, I said, my voice unsteady with emotion. Just trust me this one time. Tomorrow, please, let me drive you. My eyes held none of their usual weakness. There was only a raw, desperate certainty she had never seen before. She stared, thrown off balance, her struggles weakening. In the silence of the living room, the only sound was the pull and push of our breathing. Finally, she broke. She looked away. You're insane. She spat the word out, yanked her arm from my grasp, and strode into her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. But I knew. The glacier she'd built around her heart now had a crack in it. I stood there, staring at the closed door, and slowly my hands tightened into fists. Catherine, in this life, I won't let anyone hurt you. And David Sterling, you'll pay back every debt with interest. I didn't linger. I went straight to the study. It was going to be a long night. I had work to do. The first step was to make David taste his own poison. In my last life, the police had ruled Catherine's death an accident. Brake failure, a truck driver asleep at the wheel. It was a perfect, tragic story. If David hadn't confessed at the end, I would have died believing the lie. He was meticulous, careful, and he was counting on me being the same emotional, predictable fool I'd always been. That was my greatest advantage. I booted up my laptop and pulled up the vehicle information for Catherine's red Porsche. It was a birthday gift from her father the year before, the car she drove most often. David would have targeted it. I didn't go down to the garage yet. It was too early. I needed to wait for the dead of night, when the security cameras recorded nothing but shadows. As I waited, I forced myself to calm down, to walk through every detail of my past life. What was David's endgame? At first, I thought he just wanted to get rid of me, his rival. But after Catherine's death, he'd moved so fast, consolidating power at Shaw Industries, using outside capital to sideline her family. His ambition was bigger than just a woman. He wanted the entire empire. So, was I really his primary target in the crash? A horrifying thought took shape in my mind. He'd said to me, I meant for it to be you, but then she decided to switch cars at the last minute. That morning, after our fight, Catherine had stormed out. Normally, she would have driven her own car. And if I had stormed out in a huff, I would have taken my old, beat-up Honda. So how could David have been so certain I would be the one driving her Porsche? Unless he created a reason that forced me to. My blood ran cold. In my past life, after I'd slammed the door, I'd gone down to the garage to find all 4 of my tires slashed. Blind with fury, assuming Catherine had done it in revenge, and desperate not to be late for a meeting I thought was important, I'd grabbed her spare key from the hook and taken the Porsche without thinking. The person who slashed my tires. It was David. He had counted on my short temper, my selfishness. He had set a trap, and the target, from the very beginning, was whoever left the apartment driving that red Porsche. Me or Catherine. If I died, he could play the comforting friend, the shoulder for her to cry on. If she died, he could step in as the grieving colleague and loyal second-in-command, the only one capable of holding the company together. Either way, he won. One stone, 2 birds. Cold-blooded genius. The realization left me slick with sweat. David, you're even more twisted than I thought. I took a deep breath, forcing down the hatred. Now, it was my turn to set the board. At 3 in the morning, the entire high-rise was silent. I changed into dark clothes, pulled on a beanie and a mask, and slipped into the service stairwell, avoiding the cameras on my way to the underground garage. The garage was empty, the motion sensor lights casting long shadows. There they were, Catherine's red Porsche, sleek and aggressive, just like her. And in a far corner, my old gray Honda Civic, looking apologetic just like me. I went to the Porsche first. Using the faint glow of my phone screen, I examined the brake system. It didn't take long to find it. A fitting on the brake line was almost imperceptibly loose. He'd already been here. He was fast. I didn't touch it. If I did, he'd know something was wrong. The trap had to remain set. Next, I went to my Honda. Slashing tires was amateur hour. I popped the hood and, with a pair of pliers, cleanly snipped a single, nondescript wire inside the distributor cap. The car was dead. It wouldn't turn over, but from the outside, it would look perfectly fine. I wasn't finished. Back in the apartment, I found David's number and, after a moment's hesitation, called him. It rang for a long time before he picked up, his voice thick with sleep, but layered with fake concern. Luke, it's late. Is everything okay? Did you and Catherine have another fight? Hearing that phony sympathy, I almost lost it, but I held it together. I pitched my voice low, full of defeat. David, yeah, we did. Look, the Southside Project meeting is tomorrow. I was thinking I'd drive her, try to smooth things over, but I let the sentence hang, injecting it with embarrassment. He was quiet for a second, then asked, his voice cautious, but what? Your car. Acting up again. Yeah, I grunted. It won't start. No idea what's wrong. And we have to leave first thing. No time to get it towed. In the darkness, I could almost see the smug smile spreading across his face. He thought I was the same pathetic loser, unable to handle the simplest problem, now coming to him for help. His voice immediately warmed. Hey, don't worry about it. That's an easy fix. I've got a spare Mercedes you can use. Just take it. The key is in the top drawer of my desk at the office. The code is Catherine's birthday. Grab it in the morning. I don't know, man. That's too much to ask, I said, pretending to refuse. Don't be ridiculous. We're friends. Anything for Catherine is anything for me. I'm happy to help you two patch things up. It's the right thing to do, he said, every word smooth and insincere. Okay, thanks, David. I owe you one. Don't mention it. Get some sleep. I hung up, the miserable act falling away from my face, replaced by an icy smile. David, you think you've played every angle. You think I'm grabbing your keys like a lifeline. You have no idea that what you just handed me wasn't a key. It was a blade, and I'm going to use it to dig your grave. In my last life, my stupidity killed Catherine. In this one, I would use your arrogance to destroy you. This was a high-stakes gamble, my new life against your ruin, and I had no intention of losing. The next morning, I was up before the sun. Instead of sleeping in, I went to the kitchen. The fridge was mostly empty, but I found eggs, bread, and some scallions. I made 2 plates of scrambled eggs, perfectly fluffy, with a side of toast, and sprinkled the eggs with finely chopped greens. When Catherine emerged from her bedroom, dressed in a tailored beige pantsuit, her face a cool, impassive mask, the smell of cooking made her pause. She saw the 2 plates on the dining table, and a flicker of surprise crossed her face. In 3 years of marriage, it was the first time I'd ever made her breakfast. You. She started to say something, then stopped, pulling out a chair and sitting down. I placed a fork next to her plate. Eat up before it gets cold. She picked up the fork and ate in silence, taking small, elegant bites. Even eating something as simple as scrambled eggs, she looked like royalty. Halfway through the meal, she spoke without looking up. Why exactly should I listen to you today? I knew what she was asking. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest. I looked at her. Because I'm your husband. Her hand tightened on her fork. She didn't say another word. We finished the meal in silence. She ate slowly, but she finished every bite. Afterward, she picked up her purse and car key from the counter. I'll get the car from the garage. Meet me at the entrance. She still wasn't giving in. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Okay. She gave me a look that said, good, you know your place, and clicked out the door at her heels. I followed a few steps behind. A few minutes later, an infuriated shout echoed up from the garage. What is going on? I walked down the ramp to see her squatting beside her red Porsche, a look of sheer disbelief on her face. The front left tire was completely flat, a shiny nail sticking out of the rubber. Looks like you got a flat, I said, stating the obvious. The nail was, of course, my addition from the night before. If you're going to put on a show, you commit to the part. Catherine stood up and stomped her foot, a rare crack in her composure that I found strangely endearing. Now what? If we call a car service and have the driver meet us, we'll be late. She glanced at her watch, her brow tight with anxiety. I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of my Honda with its hood up. Mine's dead too. Won't start. Her expression darkened completely. She stared at me, her eyes full of suspicion, as if to say, "Did you orchestrate all of this?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Now," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "we have only one option. We take the car I got." "The one you borrowed?" she shot back. I pressed the unlock button on the key fob in my pocket. Across the garage, the lights of a black Mercedes S-Class flashed twice. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. She recognized the car. It was one of David's. You asked him for it." Her voice was laced with astonishment. She knew David and I couldn't stand each other. My pathetic pride had never allowed me to ask him for anything. "To make sure you get there safely? I'd do anything." I opened the passenger door and gestured for her to get in. She stood there, staring at me for a solid 10 seconds, trying to read my face, but I gave her nothing but calm resolve. Finally, she gave in. She slid into the passenger seat, buckled her seatbelt, and said nothing. The car pulled smoothly out of the garage and into the rush hour traffic. I drove carefully, keeping a steady pace. I could feel Catherine watching me out of the corner of her eye. Today, to her, I was a complete enigma. I didn't care. My full attention was on the road, the clock, and the rearview mirror. In my last life, the crash happened at 9:15 a.m. on Lakeshore Drive, right at the downhill curve near the Oak Street bend. I watched the mirror, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. 9:10 a.m. We turned onto the drive. Traffic was light. The wind coming off the lake was cool and damp. "You're being very strange today," Catherine finally said. "Am I?" I smiled faintly. "How so?" "Everything," she said. I didn't reply. My focus was entirely on the small black that had just appeared in my rearview mirror. A heavy-duty dump truck. High cab, massive grille. A steel monster. It was here. My heart hammered against my ribs. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Even knowing what was coming, my body's primal fear was impossible to suppress. "Speed up. What are you crawling for?" Catherine urged, noticing my slowing pace. I ignored her, my eyes glued to the mirror. The truck was getting closer, and it wasn't slowing down at all. This was it. A split second before the truck's grill would have touched our bumper, I yanked the wheel hard to the right and stomped on the accelerator. The tires screamed in protest. The Mercedes fishtailed violently, sliding almost completely sideways as it shot across the lane and onto the emergency shoulder. "Ah!" Catherine cried out, thrown against her seat by the violent G-force. And in the instant we cleared the lane, crunch, an earth-shattering boom exploded behind us. The runaway dump truck, a 10-ton battering ram, roared through the exact spot we had just occupied and plowed directly into the concrete divider of the curve ahead. Metal shrieked and twisted. Debris rained down on the asphalt. The entire road seemed to shake. In the rearview mirror, I could see the truck's cab, crushed like a soda can. It was exactly the same as before. Except this time, we weren't the ones turned into scrap metal. The car was utterly silent, save for the frantic drumming of my own heart and Catherine's ragged, shallow breaths. Her face was ashen. She was still trembling, her body rigid with shock. She turned her head slowly, first to the horrific scene outside, then to me. She looked at me as if I were some kind of alien. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I unbuckled my seatbelt, pulled a bottle of water from the glove compartment, twisted it open, and held it to her lips. "Here, drink some of this." My voice was steady, calm, with a gentleness I hadn't even realized I possessed. She didn't take it. She just stared at me, her eyes, usually so cool, now swirling with shock, terror, and a deep, bottomless confusion. It was a long time before she found her voice. When she did, each word was forced out from between clenched teeth. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? She wasn't stupid. My behavior all morning, insisting on driving her, borrowing David's car, and now this. This miraculous, impossible evasion. It couldn't be a coincidence. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just reached over and gently wiped a bead of cold sweat from her temple. I looked her in the eyes and repeated what I had told her the night before. I told you, from now on, I'm in charge of keeping you safe. Then I picked up my phone and dialed 911. Yes, hello? There's been a major accident on northbound Lakeshore Drive. A dump truck lost control and hit the median. Also, I have reason to believe the braking system of the car I'm driving has been tampered with. Yes, the plate number is. I calmly recited the license plate. The car is registered to a Mr. David Sterling. In the passenger seat, Catherine flinched as if she'd been struck. She stared at me, a new layer of fear mixing with her confusion. Who are you? I could see the question in her eyes. How did you know? And why are you pointing all of this at David? The man she had dismissed for 3 years as her useless husband had, in the span of a single morning, become a stranger she couldn't begin to comprehend. The police were there in minutes. The drive was shut down. As the first witnesses on the scene, Catherine and I were taken aside to give our statements. I recounted the events exactly as they happened, making sure to emphasize that when I tried to brake before the swerve, the pedal felt mushy and unresponsive. A state trooper went to inspect the Mercedes. He was back in minutes, his face grim. Brake lines leaking. The coupling was deliberately loosened, he said, his voice low. This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder. At the word murder, Catherine's body went taut. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. I just looked calmly at the officer and asked the question I already knew the answer to. What about the truck driver? They're trying to get him out now, but it doesn't look good. We ran his plates. He's got a history of reckless driving, a couple of DUIs. Our working theory is he was paid to make this look like a tragic accident. Paid. It all fit. Naturally, the next question was about the car's owner. Is your vehicle, sir? An older detective asked me. No, I borrowed it from a friend, I replied. And your friend's name? David Sterling, I said, letting the name hang in the air. He's the executive vice president at Shaw Industries. He's my wife's, Ms. Shaw's, most trusted colleague. I put a slight, deliberate pause between wife and Ms. Shaw, packing the statement with implication. The detective wrote the name down in his notebook and confirmed they would be bringing Mr. Sterling in for questioning immediately. After we finished our statements, we were allowed to leave. The scene was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and twisted metal. We weren't getting to the south side today. I called an Uber to take us home. In the back of the car, Catherine was silent, staring out the window, lost in thought. I knew her mind must be a war zone. What she thought was a freak accident was now an attempt on her life. And the target wasn't a car belonging to David, her closest friend and confidant. The shock had to be overwhelming. When we got back to the apartment, she walked into the living room without a word and sank into the sofa. Her immaculate pantsuit was now wrinkled and smudged. I poured a glass of water and set it on the coffee table in front of her. Just rest. I'll handle things at the office, I said. She looked up, her gaze sharp. And how are you going to do that? I'm going to call Arthur Hansen. Let him know you're taking a few days off for personal reasons. As for the South Side project, it can wait. Hansen was the largest shareholder on the board outside of the Shaw family, an old friend of her father's and a decent man. Catherine didn't argue. Her mind was too frayed to deal with work. She just stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Luke, what is it you really want? She finally asked. To protect you. I answered simply and directly. Protect me? A bitter, self-deprecating smile touched her lips. Like this? By accusing David? Luke, do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you know how important he is to the company? Without concrete proof, all you're doing is creating chaos. Her voice had regained its usual commanding, icy tone, but this time I could hear the fear beneath it. She was terrified that all of this might actually be true. Proof? I let out a short, humorless laugh. Catherine, do you think the police are idiots? Tampered brakes on a car he lent me, and a runaway truck that just happens to be aiming for us? You don't think that's enough to start asking some hard questions? I paused, then walked over and knelt in front of her, meeting her gaze. Don't you get it? This was a trap set for you. If you had been driving your own car today, right now you'd be. I couldn't finish the sentence. The image of her mangled body from my past life flashed in my mind, and my heart seized in my chest. Catherine saw the raw terror in my eyes, the undisguised pain. The icy armor she wore finally began to crack and fall away. She opened her mouth to say something, but closed it again, looking away. I'm tired. I need to rest, she whispered, closing her eyes. I knew she had heard me. The collapse of a deep-seated trust takes time to process. I left her there, went out onto the balcony, and dialed Arthur Hansen's number. With a calm, steady voice I didn't know I possessed, I explained what had happened. I left out the attempted murder part, simply saying there had been a serious accident, and Catherine was badly shaken and needed a few days to recover. Hansen was shocked, peppering me with questions about her condition. After I reassured him, I changed the subject. Arthur, there's something I need to ask you, as a personal favor. Anything, Luke. You name it. The Lincoln Yards bid. Is the company moving forward with David's Apex Tower proposal? The Lincoln Yards development was the company's flagship project for the second half of the year. In my last life, this project was the trap David had used to cripple Shaw Industries, paving the way for his takeover. The core of that trap was his seemingly perfect Apex Tower proposal. Hansen was surprised by the question. Yes, it's already been approved by the board. We're just waiting for Catherine's final sign-off. Arthur, I'm begging you. Before Catherine gets back, you have to shell that proposal. Don't let anyone move forward with it, I said, my voice dead serious. Why? I've seen the plan. It's solid. The market analysis is excellent. Luke, I know you and David don't get along, but this isn't the time for personal feelings. This isn't personal, I said, my voice dropping. Arthur, that proposal is a time bomb. It's a trap big enough to sink the entire company. The line went silent. I knew my word alone wasn't enough to convince a veteran like him. I had to give him something big. Arthur, do you remember 3 years ago when you wanted the company to invest in that startup, Ethereum AI? He sighed. Of course I do. The board shot down. A year later, they landed a defense contract, and their stock went up 20-fold. If we got in on that, Shaw Industries would be in a very different place today. What if I told you that right now, there's an opportunity 10 times bigger than Ethereum AI? Would you believe me? Oh, I had his interest. I lowered my voice and said 4 words, quantum light photonics. On the other end of the line, Hansen's breathing hitched. Quantum light? The R&D outfit that's still in the lab phase? They haven't even produced a working prototype. Luke, where are you hearing this? This is no joke. I'm not joking, I said, my voice filled with unshakable conviction. Within 1 month, Quantum Light will announce a major technological breakthrough, certified by a national lab. Within 3 months, they will secure their first military contract. Within 6 months, their market cap will eclipse what Ethereum AI is worth today. These were not predictions. They were memories. In my past life, I'd read about their meteoric rise in the business section, another story of a fortune I'd missed. Now, that memory was my most powerful weapon. Hansen was utterly silent. He wasn't doubting me anymore. He was processing the sheer, terrifying accuracy of the information I'd just given him. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice low and heavy. Luke, what is it you want? I want to make you a deal, I said, glancing back at Catherine's silhouette in the living room. You help me delay the Apex Tower proposal for 1 week. Just 1 week. In that time, I will deliver a new proposal. If my plan doesn't satisfy you and the board, or if what I said about quantum light turns out to be false, I will voluntarily sign over all my claims to the Shaw family assets, divorce Catherine, and walk away with nothing. It was an insane bet, but it was the only way to get him to commit. The silence on the line stretched on. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm. All right, you have a deal. 1 week. Luke, I hope for Catherine's sake and the company's that you aren't bluffing. Don't worry, I said. I'm not. I hung up the phone and let out a long, slow breath. The first piece was on the board. I walked back into the living room. Catherine had opened her eyes at some point and was watching me. Her expression was complicated, a mix of curiosity, doubt, and something else I couldn't quite name. You were just on the phone. With Arthur Hansen? She asked. I was. What did you tell him? I told him, I said, walking over to her, that I'm going to take back everything that belongs to me and everything that belongs to you. Her eyelashes fluttered. She said nothing. I knew the events of the day had completely shattered her perception of me. A glacier doesn't melt in a day, but for the first time, I could see the fire burning underneath. And for now, that was enough. The next 2 days passed in an unnerving quiet. Catherine didn't go to the office. She stayed in her bedroom. I left her alone, knowing she needed space to process the betrayal and reevaluate everything she thought she knew about David and about me. I, in turn, locked myself in the study. Fueled by coffee and adrenaline, I barely slept. Memories from my past life replayed in my mind like a high-speed film. My goal wasn't just to avert the disaster of the Lincoln Yards project. It was to use this crisis to reverse the company's decline and establish myself as a voice they had to respect. I needed a new proposal, one so revolutionary, so visionary, that it would make David's meticulously crafted Apex Tower plan look like a child's drawing. In my last life, the Apex plan had won the bid because it catered to the market's obsession with luxury condos and high-end retail. But shortly after, the city announced a new urban development plan focused on green spaces and tech infrastructure. The Apex project became a square peg in a round hole, a financial black hole that nearly bankrupted Shaw Industries. David had used that turmoil, leaking data to competitors, to bring the company to its knees. This time, there would be no trap. My proposal would leapfrog the luxury condo phase entirely and aim directly at where the city would be in 5 years. The carbon-neutral smart community. At the time, the concept was pure academic theory, something you'd find in a white paper, not a boardroom. It sounded like science fiction, but I knew it was the future. I integrated photovoltaic building materials, sponge city water recycling, IoT smart home networks, automated delivery drone systems. All the technologies that would explode in the coming years, I wove them into a single cohesive vision. This wasn't a proposal. It was a prophecy. After 2 days and 2 nights, as I typed the last word, the sky outside was beginning to lighten. I dragged my exhausted body out of the study. The apartment was dark and silent. As I passed Catherine's room, I noticed her door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from her bedside lamp. On impulse, I pushed the door open. She was asleep, slumped over on her bed, still in her loungewear. The lamp was on, and a half-finished glass of milk sat on the nightstand. Even in sleep, her brow was slightly furrowed. Seeing her like that, peaceful and unguarded, my heart softened. For 3 years we'd lived under the same roof as strangers. How long had it been since I just watched her sleep? I moved to turn off the light. As my hand reached for the switch, her eyes shot open. She saw my face, inches from hers, and her body recoiled, a jolt of pure alarm. What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice raspy with sleep and fear. My hand froze in midair. It felt like a needle to the heart. Of course, to her, I was probably no different from an intruder, a useless husband who had suddenly become a different person, a man who knew things he shouldn't, a man who might be using her. I lowered my hand and pointed to the lamp. "It was on," I said softly. "Didn't want it to wake you." She glanced at the lamp, and the wariness on her face subsided slightly. "Oh, I must have fallen asleep reading." I nodded and turned to leave. "Luke," she said suddenly. I stopped and looked back. She was sitting up, hugging a pillow. The warm light softened the angles of her face. She hesitated. Have the police contacted you?" "They called yesterday," I said. "They brought David in for questioning. He denied everything. Said he has no idea what happened to the car after he lent it to me. The truck driver is still in the ICU. He hasn't woken up." It was what I expected. David was too careful to leave a paper trail. Her face fell. A part of her, I realized, was still hoping this was all a terrible mistake. "Luke," she said, looking up at me, "are you absolutely sure that it was him? Who else could it have been?" I asked. My voice was flat, devoid of anger. It was simply a statement of fact. She fell silent. He was the only one with the motive, the means, the sheer cunning to pull off something so elaborate. "So what are you?" She bit her lip. "What are you going to do? Without proof, we can't touch him." "Who said we don't have proof?" I looked at her and smiled. "Where is it?" "He's going to give it to us himself. Very soon." In my past life, after David had taken over, he'd gotten drunk and bragged to a subordinate about his perfect one stone, two birds plan. That same subordinate later turned on him over money. This time, I just needed to accelerate the timeline. And the catalyst was the proposal in my hand. Catherine was confused, but seeing the confidence on my face, she didn't press. You. She looked at my bloodshot eyes, the exhaustion etched onto my face. Her voice softened. You haven't slept at all, have you? I was taken aback. I hadn't expected the concern. I'm fine. The light in the study has been on all night, she said quietly. My heart skipped a beat. She had been paying attention. I was working on something. I went back to the study and returned with the stack of freshly printed pages. Here, take a look. What is this? She asked, taking the document. When she read the title, The Carbon-Neutral Smart Community, a new proposal for the Lincoln Yards development, her eyes widened. She turned the first page, and her breath caught. She was looking at a rendering of a futuristic cityscape that seemed pulled from a movie. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock, and finally, to utter disbelief. Photovoltaics, water recycling, smart logistics, community health clouds. Every concept was a bomb detonating in her carefully ordered world. You did this? She asked, her voice trembling as she looked up. I did. That's impossible, she blurted out. None of this is feasible. The concepts are too advanced, the technology isn't mature, and the cost. It would be astronomical. This isn't a business proposal. It's a science fiction novel. Her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. Any sane business person would dismiss it as fantasy. Don't write it off just yet, I said calmly. Look at this. I pulled a single sheet from the back of the proposal and handed it to her. It was a list of a dozen or so small, obscure tech companies. What are these? These are the key suppliers who hold the patents for every piece of technology in that proposal. I pointed to one named Microloom Tech. These guys, for instance, they have the most advanced flexible solar film technology in the country. They're losing money now, but in 6 months, they're going to land a massive contract from the Middle East, and their valuation will increase tenfold. I pointed to another, Aura IoT, and them. In 3 months, their networking protocol is going to be adopted as the new national standard for smart homes. With every name I mentioned, the color drained from Catherine's face. She had never heard of any of them, and my predictions, precise down to the month, sent a chill down her spine. How do you know all of this? She looked at me, and the expression in her eyes was no longer confusion. It was fear. A man who knows the future. That's more dangerous than any business tactic. I didn't answer her question. The secret of my rebirth was my ultimate trump card. I couldn't tell anyone, not even her. I just looked her in the eye and said, Catherine, you don't need to know how I know. You just need to make a choice. Do you believe me or not? The room was silent for a long time. She looked down at the proposal, then back up at me, her eyes a storm of conflict. To trust me meant throwing out everything she knew about business and betting the farm on an impossible future. To not trust me meant, what? What did that make this strange, unknowable man who was suddenly her husband? Finally, she let out a long breath, as if she'd made the most difficult decision of her life. She stacked the pages neatly, placed them on the coffee table, and stood up. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, board meeting. You're coming with me. And with that, she turned, walked back in her bedroom, and closed the door. I stood there, a slow smile spreading across my face. I had won the bet. The glacier was finally starting to open up for me, and that was all the leverage I needed to move the world. The next morning, at 9:30, the top-floor boardroom of Shaw Industries was filled with somber suits. The board of directors and senior executives were all there, their faces grim. To the left of the chairman's seat sat Arthur Hansen, his hair thinning, but his eyes sharp. Directly across from him sat a man in his early 30s, wearing thin, gold-rimmed glasses, the picture of refined intelligence. David Sterling. He looked tired, with faint dark circles under his eyes, but he was holding it together. When Catherine and I walked in, his smile froze for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. Catherine, are you feeling better? I heard about the accident. I was so worried, he said, standing up, his voice dripping with concern. His eyes flicked from her to me, and a flicker of pure venom crossed his face before vanishing. I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Catherine said, her tone neutral. She walked directly to the head of the table and sat down. I took the seat right beside her. That seat was reserved for the highest level of the executive team. My move drew the eyes of everyone in the room. There was surprise, confusion, but mostly there was contempt. Everyone knew Luke Miller, the useless husband who was nothing more than a parasite. Why did he have to sit there? Catherine, is this? One of the board members began, gesturing toward me. Before she could answer, David jumped in, feigning surprise. Luke, I think you're in the wrong seat. This is a formal board meeting. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. You don't belong here. I ignored him, calmly picking up my water glass. All eyes turned to Catherine, expecting her to put me in my place. But what she said next stunned the entire room into silence. She looked around the table, her voice clear and absolute. From this day forward, Luke will be acting as my special advisor. He will have full authority to represent me in all project decisions for the company. She paused, then added a final, devastating blow. He is not only my advisor. He is my husband. His voice is my voice. The room erupted in hushed, frantic whispers. Everyone looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Let this kept man make decisions? Had the crash given her a concussion? The smile completely vanished from David's face. He looked from Catherine to me, his eyes burning with a jealousy so raw it was almost palpable. Catherine, are you insane? He doesn't know the first thing about business. He can't even read a balance sheet. Are you trying to destroy Shaw Industries? He sputtered, losing his composure. I know exactly what I'm doing. Catherine's voice turned to ice. Mr. Sterling, watch your tone. This is a board meeting. David was left speechless, his face turning pale. Arthur Hansen cleared his throat. All right, let's settle down. It's Ms. Shaw's decision. We should respect it. Let's begin. With Hansen backing her, the rest of the board reluctantly fell silent. The meeting began, and the agenda quickly turned to the Lincoln Yards project. David immediately took the floor, launching his presentation on the Apex Tower. Ladies and gentlemen, the Apex proposal is the result of 3 months of intensive work, market research, and data analysis. We project that upon completion, this project will generate a profit of at least $500 million for the corporation within 3 years. He was in his element, painting a picture of a glorious future. Several of the board members nodded in approval. Only I, watching the slick graphics and inflated numbers on the screen, allowed myself a small, cold smile. When David finished his grand speech, basking in the anticipated applause, I set my glass down on the table with a soft click. The sound cut through the room. Mr. Miller, do you have a different opinion? Arthur Hansen prompted, looking at me. All eyes turned to me. David crossed his arms, a smirk on his face, as if to say, let's hear what this idiot has to say. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. Mr. Sterling's proposal is beautiful, I began, my voice even, but with all due respect, it's completely worthless. The temperature in the room dropped to freezing. Luke, what the hell are you talking about? David shot to his feet, pointing a finger at me. What gives you the right to criticize my work? What do you know? It's not about what I know, I said, looking back at him with something like pity. It's about what's coming. And if this company follows your plan, within 2 years, we'll be bankrupt. You're lying, slandering me. David was shaking with rage. We'll see about that. I ignored him, inserting a flash drive into the laptop. The Apex Tower vanished from the screen, replaced by the title page of my proposal, the carbon-neutral smart community. When the futuristic rendering of the community appeared on the screen, the room went silent. What is this? A board member whispered. This, I said, picking up the laser pointer, is the future. For the next hour, I held the room captive. I didn't talk about abstract theories. I talked about the future as if it were the past, laying out a timeline of policy changes, technological breakthroughs, and market shifts. Within 6 months, the city is going to pass the strictest carbon emissions regulations in the country. Any energy-inefficient construction will be halted indefinitely. Mr. Sterling's massive retail complex will be the first to go. Within a year, the federal government will elevate green energy and sustainable architecture to a national strategic priority. The photovoltaic materials in my proposal will be eligible for massive federal subsidies. Within 18 months, the current luxury real estate market will collapse. High-end condos will be a dime a dozen. The new luxury will be homes that are healthy, technologically integrated, and environmentally conscious. With every point I made, the faces in the room grew more serious. David's face grew paler. What I was saying was outside their experience, but I delivered it with such conviction, with such specific detail, that it was impossible to dismiss. Arthur Hansen was looking at me not with curiosity, but with awe. My predictions aligned perfectly with the logic behind the rise of quantum light photonics. When I finished, the boardroom was dead silent. Everyone was staring at me as if I were a creature from another planet. They couldn't understand how this man, this nobody, could see so far ahead. Nonsense. It's all nonsense. It was David, a cornered animal making his last stand. Carbon neutral? Smart communities? These are empty buzzwords. The policies you're talking about are fantasy. And those little companies you mentioned? No one's ever heard of them. You're a charlatan, Luke. A snake oil salesman. He turned to the board, desperate. Don't listen to him. He's a lunatic trying to ruin this company. But this time, no one backed him up. The board members were all looking down, calculating. My plan was audacious, but the future it promised was intoxicating. If even half of what I said was true, it wasn't just a project. It was a gold mine. Then Catherine spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. My decision is final. We are moving forward with Luke's proposal for the Lincoln Yards project. David staggered as if he'd been physically struck. Catherine, you can't. She didn't even look at him. She stood up and walked to my side. Then, in front of everyone, she did something that left the entire room speechless. She reached out and gently straightened my tie. The gesture was small, intimate, and in her eyes, there was a look I had never seen before. Pride. She looked out at the stunned faces and spoke, her voice ringing with authority. Allow me to reintroduce him. This is my special advisor and my proxy in all decisions. He is also my husband, Luke Miller. At that moment, a ray of sunlight cut through the blinds, illuminating the two of us. I saw a faint blush on her cool, beautiful face, and I knew. The glacier that had stood between us for 3 years had finally, truly begun to melt. David Sterling collapsed back into his chair, his face the color of ash. He had lost, utterly and completely. The board meeting ended. My proposal was approved, thanks to Arthur's staunch support and Catherine's iron will. But it came with a condition, one I suggest to myself. A bet. We had 1 month. If in 1 month, my first prediction, the quantum light breakthrough, did not come to pass, the proposal would be voided. I would resign and relinquish any and all claims to the Shaw family fortune. It was a gambit designed to force their hand. As we left the boardroom, David trailed behind the others like a ghost, his eyes fixed on me, burning with a hatred that promised revenge. I knew he wasn't done. A cornered snake is the most dangerous kind, and that was exactly what I was counting on. Back in the president's office, Catherine dismissed her assistant and made me a cup of tea herself. It was the first time I had ever been inside. The decor was minimalist, cool, and efficient, just like her. How did you do that? She asked, setting the cup down in front of me. All of that in the meeting. Do what? I asked, playing dumb. Don't play dumb. She rolled her eyes, but for the first time, it was playful, not dismissive. The policy changes, the information about those companies. Where did you get it? I sipped the tea. If I told you I could see the future, would you believe me? I said, half joking. She just gave me a flat look. Be serious. I'm being serious. It's a trade secret, I said with a smile. The truth of my rebirth was a secret I had to keep. I didn't want her to see me as a freak. She let it go. Are you sure about this? 1 month. Quantum light. Will it really happen? Her voice was tinged with worry. The future of her family's company was riding on this. Don't worry. I put down my cup and covered her hand with mine. It was still cool to the touch, but this time she didn't pull away. I would never gamble with you, or with our future. A faint blush colored her cheeks. She gently pulled her hand back and took a sip of her own tea, trying to hide her fluster. So what's your next move? She asked, all business again. David, you won't just give up. I know, I said, leaning back. I know exactly what he's going to do, which is, he's going to make a desperate, last-ditch play, I said with a cold smile. He lost the board's confidence, and he's been sidelined from the biggest project in the company's history. His only hope now is to prove that my plan is a fantasy and that I'm a fraud. I ticked off the points on my fingers. To do that, he has 2 options. 1, Wait a month and pray quantum light fails. He's not that patient. 2. Find a fatal flaw in my proposal. Catherine frowned. Is there a flaw? Of course, I admitted. A huge one. What is it? She asked, alarmed. Money, I said. The initial capital investment required for my plan is astronomical. Acquiring stakes in all those startups, buying the land, the materials. We couldn't afford it even if we liquidated every asset Shaw Industries has. That was the board's biggest reservation. Catherine's face grew grim. So I cut her off, a slow smile spreading across my face. David is going to attack us there. He'll rally the directors who already hate me, using fiscal responsibility as his weapon. And he'll call in every favor he has in the banking world to make sure every line of credit we have dries up. Then what do we do? She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Don't worry, I said, patting her hand. This is exactly what I want. What you want? Yes, I said, my eyes locking with hers. I want him to think he has me cornered. I want him to believe that if he can just cut off our cash flow, he'll win. I need him to push all his chips onto the table. And then, I said, a glint in my eye, I'm going to show him that the powerful friends he's relying on are a house of cards, ready to collapse. In my past life, in the years after David had ruined me, I learned a few things about the city's underbelly. I knew which powerful bank presidents had secrets they'd kill to protect. I knew which investment gurus were really just one step ahead of bankruptcy. These were the people David trusted, and they were about to become my weapons. Catherine, for the next few weeks, I need you to do nothing, I instructed. No matter what David does, no matter what rumors you hear, just ignore them. Sit back and enjoy the show. She looked at my confident face, still confused, but she nodded. She was choosing to trust me again. The next few days unfolded exactly as I predicted. David went on the offensive. He spread rumors throughout the company that I was a lunatic, that my plan would bankrupt them, that Catherine was under my spell. He held secret meetings with board members, trying to build a coalition to force a revote. Soon enough, the CFO reported that our applications for bridge loans at 3 different banks had all been mysteriously denied. The storm clouds were gathering over Shaw Industries. The consensus was that I had finally overplayed my hand, and that Catherine's reign as CEO was about to come to a crashing end. Through it all, I acted as if nothing was wrong. I showed up at the office, read the Wall Street Journal, and drank tea. Catherine was putting on a brave face, but I could see the strain. Finally, one afternoon, she burst in my office. Luke, what are you waiting for? Our credit lines are frozen. We're about to run out of cash. She slapped a financial report down on my desk, her hand trembling. I put down my paper and smiled at her. Don't worry. The fish is about to take the bait. What fish? Just then, there was a knock on the door. It was Catherine's assistant, Ms. Shaw. Mr. Miller. Mr. Sterling is here to see you. He says he has a solution to the company's funding problem. Showtime. I glanced at Catherine. She looked stunned. I gestured for the assistant to let him in. A moment later, David walked in, the picture of magnanimity. The defeated look was gone, replaced by his usual smooth, confident smile. Catherine, Luke, he said, as if we were all the best of friends. What can we do for you, David? I asked dryly. He sat down and placed a briefcase on the table, opening it to reveal a thick contract. I heard the company was having a little trouble with cash flow, he said with a benevolent smile. The Lincoln Yards project is too important to let a little funding issue get in the way. Don't you agree, Luke? The man was a hell of an actor. So, I prompted. So, I called in a few favors. I found us an investor. He slid the contract across the table. Sterling Cross Capital. They're prepared to invest $300 million to fund the initial phase of the project. Sterling Cross Capital. A real smile touched my lips. In my past life, Sterling Cross was the vulture fund David had partnered with to short Shaw Industries stock into oblivion. He was running the exact same play. Did he really think I was that same clueless idiot? Oh, and what are their terms? I asked, feigning excitement. Very simple. David's smile finally showed its teeth. They want a 30% equity stake in the project, a permanent seat on the oversight committee, and unilateral veto power over all expenditures. It wasn't an investment. It was a hostile takeover. Catherine's face went cold. She opened her mouth to refuse, but I put a hand on her arm, stopping her. I shot to my feet, my face a mask of ecstatic disbelief. 300 million. David, this is incredible. You're a lifesaver. I grabbed his hand and shook it vigorously. On behalf of the company, on behalf of Catherine, thank you. You've saved us. My over-the-top reaction left both of them speechless. Catherine stared at me like I'd grown a second head. David's face was a mask of smug satisfaction. He thought the dumb jock had been so dazzled by the big number that he'd lost his mind. "Ha. Well, anything for the company, Luke," he said magnanimously. "What are we waiting for? Let's sign it right now," I said, grabbing the contract eagerly. "Wait." Catherine finally found her voice, snatching the papers out of my hand. "Luke, have you lost your mind? We can't agree to these terms." "Why not?" I asked, turning to her with a look of pure innocence. "It's money, Catherine. We need it." "You—" She was so angry she was speechless. David, enjoying the show, chimed in. "Catherine, I think Luke has a point. Under the circumstances, getting the funding is the most important thing. The terms, well, everything is negotiable." "Exactly. We can negotiate," I chimed in. Catherine looked from my eager face to David's smug one and sank back in her chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. She had no idea what I was doing. "Excellent. Since Luke is on board, I'll consider it settled," David said quickly before I could change my mind. "I'll call Mr. Vance at Sterling Cross and set up a signing ceremony as soon as possible." He stood up, beaming, and strode out of the office, the victor. The moment the door closed, Catherine was on her feet. "Luke, what in God's name are you playing at? You're inviting the wolves into the hen house," she hissed. The ecstatic grin fell from my face, replaced by calm, cold resolve. I took her hand and gently guided her back to her seat. I held up the contract. Who's the wolf and who's the hunter remains to be seen. I pointed to the name on the contract, a cruel smile playing on my lips. David thinks he just handed me a dose of poison. He has no idea he just signed his own death warrant. The fish was on the hook. It was time to reel him in. 3 days later, the signing ceremony between Shaw Industries and Sterling Cross Capital was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. David had orchestrated the entire affair, pulling out all the stops. He'd invited every major financial news outlet and a who's who of the city's business elite. He was positioning himself as the savior of Shaw Industries, the man who cleaned up the mess made by the CEO's foolish husband. Before the ceremony, Catherine and I were in a private suite. She looked stunning in a silver evening gown, but her face was etched with worry. "Luke, this is too risky," she said, pacing. "I've had my people look into Sterling Cross. Their reputation is aggressive. Once we sign this, we lose control of the project." I straightened my tie in the mirror and smiled at her reflection. "Don't worry. They aren't the stars of today's show." "Then who is?" "You'll see." I offered my arm. "Shall we, Ms. Shaw?" She hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand on my arm. Together, we walked into the ballroom. It was a chaotic sea of flashing cameras and champagne glasses. David was at the center of it all, holding court with a group of reporters. The head of Sterling Cross, a portly man named Robert Vance, stood beside him, grinning. When David saw us, he strode over. "Catherine, Luke, there you are. Robert was just asking about you." "Ms. Shaw, pleasure. I've heard so much about you," Vance said, extending a fleshy hand toward Catherine. I stepped forward, smoothly intercepting the handshake. "Mr. Vance, Luke Miller." A flicker of annoyance crossed Vance's face before being replaced by a greasy smile. "Ah, the man with a visionary plan. A bold move, sir, a bold move." The compliment was barbed with sarcasm. "I just got lucky," I said with a humble smile. After a few minutes of false pleasantries, the ceremony began. The four of us sat at a long table on a raised dais. Below us, hundreds of eyes and cameras were trained on us. David gave a rousing speech about the bright future of Shaw Industries, shooting a triumphant look my way. I just smiled back. Finally, the moment of truth. The MC announced, and now, will the representatives please sign the official agreement? Contract were placed before us. David and Vance signed with a flourish. All attention turned to us. I could practically see the headlines. Kept husband sells out company for quick cash. Ice Queen CEO ousted. Catherine's hand trembled as she picked up her pen. She looked at me, her eyes wide with desperation. I gave her a subtle, reassuring nod and picked up my own pen. Just as the nib was about to touch the paper, "Stop!" A commanding voice boomed from the back of the ballroom. The entire room fell silent. Every head turned. Striding through the entrance was an elderly man in a sharp, dark suit. He was flanked by several grim-faced men who had FBI emblazoned on their jackets. At the sight of the old man, the color drained from Robert Vance's face. Sweat beaded on his forehead. David just looked confused. A murmur went through the crowd. Is that Arthur Covington? From the Treasury Department? What's he doing here?" Catherine recognized him too. "That's Secretary Covington." "What's going on?" she whispered. I put down my pen and stood up, a calm smile on my face. It was time to land the whole school of fish. Covington marched directly to the stage. His sharp eyes landed on Robert Vance, who was now visibly trembling. "Robert Vance," Covington said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Mr. Secretary," Vance stammered. "Sterling Cross Capital, under investigation for 37 counts of bank fraud, totaling over $1.2 billion, as well as the operation of 26 shell corporations for the purposes of money laundering. Do you deny these charges?" With every word, Vance seemed to shrink. Finally, his legs gave out, and he collapsed in his chair, his face a deathly gray. The ballroom was in a state of shock. Sterling Cross, a titan of finance, was a criminal enterprise? David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He stared at Vance, then at me, his mind unable to process what was happening. "Take him away," Covington said with a wave of his hand. 2 FBI agents moved forward and hauled Vance to his feet. "It wasn't me. It was Sterling," Vance suddenly shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at David. "He came to me. He had a plan to short Shaw Industries stock. He promised me a 30% cut. It was all him." The room exploded. Every camera, every eye, swiveled to David Sterling. The blood drained from his face. "No, he's lying. I didn't," he cried, but his panicked voice betrayed him. "Take him as well." For questioning, Covington ordered. As the agents closed in, David completely lost it. He pointed at me, his face contorted with hate. "It was him. Luke. He set me up. This was all his plan." But no one was listening. A pathetic, washed-up house husband orchestrating a federal takedown of a major investment firm? It was laughable. As he was dragged from the ballroom like a common criminal, I watched him go, my expression unreadable. "David, for what you did to Catherine, to her father. This is just the beginning." When the chaos died down, Secretary Covington approached me. He studied me for a long moment, then a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Well played, Mr. Miller. I was just doing my civic duty, Mr. Secretary," I said modestly. 3 days earlier, I had anonymously submitted a file to the Treasury Department, detailing the criminal enterprise of Sterling Cross Capital, complete with evidence of their past crimes and details of the crimes they were about to commit. A man like Covington knew exactly what to do with that information. "The lead engineer at Quantum Light Photonics is a former student of mine," Covington said casually. "He called me last night, couldn't stop talking about a revolutionary breakthrough they'd just had in the lab." He looked at me, his eyes full of admiration. "That news isn't public yet. So tell me, Mr. Miller, how did you know about a month ago?" The question I had been waiting for. Beside me, I could feel Catherine hold her breath. I met the old man's gaze and smiled. "Mr. Secretary, perhaps you've heard of an anonymous investor who goes by the name Oracle?" Covington's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Oracle? The ghost trader who netted $10 billion shorting tech stocks 6 months ago? The one nobody can identify?" "The one and only," I said calmly. It was a lie, of course, but it was a necessary one. I needed a legend, an identity that could explain the impossible. A mythical god of finance was the perfect cover. Covington stared at me for a long moment, then let out a deep laugh. "Well, I'll be damned. The younger generation truly is something to behold." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Shaw Industries is lucky to have you, son." With that, he turned and left. And beside me, Catherine was frozen solid, staring at me as if I had just sprouted wings. The legendary, mysterious Oracle was her useless husband. The world had gone completely mad. The story of that day became the stuff of legend in the city's financial circles. David Sterling and Robert Vance were facing a mountain of federal charges. And Luke Miller, the man everyone had written off, was suddenly the most enigmatic and powerful man in town. Was I the heir to a secret fortune? A government agent on a deep cover assignment? The most popular theory was that I was, in fact, the ghost trader Oracle. I never confirmed or denied any of it. Mystery was my best defense. The crisis at Shaw Industries was over. The board now looked at me with a mixture of fear and reverence. Banks that had denied us loans were now begging for our business. And, just as I predicted, Quantum Light announced their breakthrough, sending their stock into the stratosphere and making Shaw Industries an obscene amount of money overnight. Everything was going perfectly, except for my wife. On the car ride home, she didn't say a word. She just kept stealing glances at me, her expression a whirlwind of shock, awe, curiosity, and, was that hurt? The moment we walked through the door, she cornered me. Are you really Oracle? She demanded, her voice small. Do you want me to be? I countered. Just answer the question, she snapped, with a hint of a pout I'd never seen before. I saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes, and my heart ached. The lie had been necessary, but it had shaken her to the core. The man she had spent 3 years looking down on had suddenly become a giant. I didn't answer. I just pulled her in my arms. She stiffened, but I held her close. Catherine, does it matter who I am? I whispered into her hair. All that matters is that I'm here now, and I will never, ever let anyone hurt you again. I felt her defenses crumble. She relaxed against me, her body going soft in my arms. A moment later, I felt a damp spot spreading on my shirt. She was crying, silently. In 2 lifetimes, I had never seen her cry. The glacier had a molten core after all. I just held her, stroking her back, letting her finally release the fear and confusion and pain of the last few years. That night, we talked for hours. I didn't tell her about being reborn. I just fleshed out the story of Oracle, of an anonymous trader who had grown tired of the game and just wanted a quiet life. She believed me, or at least she wanted to. So you were lying to me? For 3 years, she asked, her eyes still red. She punched me lightly on the chest. Not lying, I said, catching her hand and kissing her knuckles. Just conducting an experiment, to see if you could fall in love with me even when I had nothing. You're infuriating, she mumbled, blushing, trying to pull her hand away. So what was the result? I pressed. The result, she said, turning her head away to hide a smile, is that you're a big, fat liar. The river of ice that had flowed between us had finally thawed. Without David, without the misunderstandings and my own crippling insecurity, our relationship began to bloom. I made her breakfast every morning. She started waiting up for me when I worked late. We talked about our days. I learned that beneath her cool exterior was a warm, thoughtful woman who was just terrible at expressing it. I used my memories of her to do small things, bringing her the almond croissants from the little bakery in Lincoln Park she secretly loved, having a hot water bottle and tea ready for her when her cramps were bad. I even got her a hypoallergenic ragdoll cat, which she named Marshmallow and pretended to find annoying, but secretly cuddled every night. Her gaze softened from awe to affection, and then to love. The transformation was not lost on the employees at Shaw Industries, who were flabbergasted to see their ICE Queen CEO positively glowing. With the Lincoln Yards project running smoothly under Catherine's brilliant management, I had become happily obsolete. One afternoon, as I was lounging in my office, she came in, looking radiant in a white sundress. Slipping off again, Mr. Chairman, she teased. With a CEO this capable, I can't afford to, I said, pulling her down onto the sofa beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Luke, she said softly. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me, she whispered. If you had walked out that morning, like you always did, she didn't need to finish. I knew. We would have been lost to each other forever. I turned and looked at her, my heart filled with a gratitude so immense it almost hurt. Never, I said, cupping her face in my hands. I told you, I almost lost you once. I will not let it happen again. What did you mean by that? She asked, her eyes searching mine. When you said you almost lost me once. What really happened, Luke? I knew I couldn't evade it any longer. It was time for a version of the truth she could accept. I took a deep breath. Catherine, do you believe in dreams? I told her everything, framing it as a vivid, terrifying nightmare. I told her about my dream of our broken marriage, the fight, her death, David's confession, and my own miserable end in a lonely hospital bed. As I spoke, her face grew pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She wasn't listening to a story. She was living my trauma. "It was just a dream, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my own eyes filled with the ghosts of my past. "What if it wasn't, Catherine?" And in that moment, she understood. She understood the sudden change in me, the impossible knowledge, the burning hatred for David. She understood that, in some way she couldn't explain, I really had lost her once. A single tear fell from her eye, then another. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "You idiot," she cried, pounding on my back. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me misunderstand you for so long?" All I could do was hold her and whisper, "I'm sorry," over and over again. In that moment, the last wall between us crumbled to dust. Later, curled up against me, she asked, "So, the Oracle story was a lie too?" I had the grace to look embarrassed. A bit of creative license. She actually laughed through her tears and playfully punched my arm again. "Liar. I promise," I said. "It's the last lie I'll ever tell you." We thought that was the end of the secrets. We were wrong. A week later, a call came from the police department. "Mr. Miller, we have a development in the David Sterling case." During interrogation, he confessed to something else. He said that 3 years ago, the death of your father-in-law, Chairman Shaw, it wasn't an accident. The world went silent. Catherine's father had died in a hiking accident, a tragic fall. It was his death that had forced a young, grieving Catherine to take over the company. And now they were telling me it was murder. I looked at Catherine. She had heard. The color drained from her face, leaving it a mask of pure, desolate white. At the police station, we watched David through the one-way glass. He was a hollowed-out shell of the man he'd been. He confessed to everything, the lead detective told us. He tampered with your father's hiking pole. The locking mechanism failed at a critical moment on a steep climb. "Why?" Catherine whispered, her voice cracking. "Jealousy," the detective said grimly. "Your father had just told him that he'd chosen you to marry Catherine. He saw you as an obstacle. He figured if your father was gone, Catherine would be forced to rely on him. He could take over the company, and then, eventually, take her too." I finally understood the true depth of his evil. It wasn't just about me or the company. It had started years before, with the murder of the man who had trusted him. Catherine completely broke down. The man who had killed her father, the man who had almost killed her, was the same man she had trusted as her closest friend for 3 years. That night, she locked herself in her father's old study. When she finally came out, hours later, her eyes were red, but her gaze was clear. She was holding a photo of her and her father. "He always liked you, she said, her voice quiet. "He told me that all the other young men he met had ambition in their eyes. But yours. He said your eyes were kind. He said he knew you would always be good to me. That's why he could rest easy." My own eyes filled with tears. I had spent my first life thinking her father saw me as a pawn, and I had utterly failed him. "I'm so sorry," I choked out. "I'm the one who's sorry," she said, tears streaming down her own face. "I never trusted his judgment. I never tried to see the man he saw. I almost lost you." She put down the photo and wrapped her arms around me, holding on tight. "Luke," she whispered into my ear, Can we start over? For real this time?" I kissed the tears from her eyes. "I thought we already had." "No." She shook her head, her gaze serious. "I mean right now, as if we just met." She pulled back and extended a hand. "Hello, my name is Catherine Shaw." I took her hand, this woman I had loved across 2 lifetimes, and smiled. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Shaw. My name is Luke Miller, and I'm going to be your husband." The trial was swift. David Sterling was found guilty on multiple counts, including murder, and was sentenced to death. With his execution, the ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest. Shaw Industries, under our joint leadership, became a titan not of real estate, but of technology, as I used my knowledge of the future to guide us into new, thriving markets. But more importantly, we found a quiet, simple happiness. We worked together, we came home together, we took walks on the weekends. We lived a life. On the 3rd anniversary of her father's death, we stood before his grave. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Dad," she said softly, "you were right about him. He's even better than you thought. I'll take care of her, sir, I promised silently, for the rest of this life and the next. On the way home, as the sun set, Catherine turned to me. Luke, I think I want to have a baby. I was so overcome with joy I could barely speak. She laughed at my goofy grin. What are we going to tell our kids, anyway? That their dad is a time traveler or a con artist who got lucky? I thought for a moment. I'll tell them, I said, pulling her close, that their dad is just a normal guy who loved their mom so much. He performed a miracle. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. Then she rose on her toes and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. It tasted of sunlight and of a future we had earned, a future that was finally ours. Love, I realized, was the only magic powerful enough to bend time itself. End.